Okay, so Ian, perhaps you'd like to tell us why the left is sticking with the cost of living crisis, and what are we talking about?
Sure. How much time do you think about me to
Less than 5 minutes.
There was an interesting point in the PMQs not so long ago, actually, where after Midland had asked a series of questions, quite ineffectually really, but nevertheless he had asked them, about cost of living. David Cameron turned around at them and said, and look at that, not a single question about the economy, which is a very problematic approach. Because of course the way that he wants to discuss the economy is he wants to start talking about GDP, in these rather macro terms. People in this country do not think about the economy in those terms, unless they're very tedious people that probably you and I like to surround ourselves with. In fact, Ed Miliband was on something quite effective, and politically he was quite unwise to depart that ground. He departed it quite quickly, actually. One of the problems of his leadership, one of the many problems of his leadership, is that even though he finds a good idea, he finds a bad idea, regardless, in 2 weeks later he would have forgotten about the idea and moved on to something else. And in this, I don't think he's really stuck to it, actually. I think, that it was there for a while, it's kind of gone now.
You definitely started.
You think he's stuck? Yeah, I mean,
I definitely started. One person, let's see.
Okay, yeah. So there is a sort of a myth that economic growth serves the Tories well in the next election, and that's not necessarily the case at all. Typically speaking, Labour doesn't get elected unless there's over 2% growth in the economy. The public typically don't really trust Labour to fix the economy, and they don't trust the Tories to give them a slice of the pie. So if you look at the broad trend, it tends to be that once the economy has been repaired a bit, they'll then put Labour in and ask for a little bit more money. And I would suggest that if I was in Tory HQ right now, I'd be extremely concerned about this fact, because I think that very likely that it will play out. The two things that would affect that would be, one, how much the Tories allow themselves to get played into the suspicion that people have of the Conservative Party. Typically speaking, people think that the Tories stand up for elites, they don't stand up for them. The Tories have done very little in terms of rhetoric or in terms of policy to address that idea. Typically speaking, they are engaged in a process of redistributing wealth from the very poor and the very vulnerable towards the middle and the higher income groups, like a sort of reverse Robin Hood. Labour have their own problem, which is that the public need to believe that they will actually do something to address the cost of living crisis, that they are competent enough to do it, and that they have the foresight enough to do it. And I'm not convinced that the public, who are in this, as in so many other things, particularly wise, do believe that that's the case. The cost of living crisis, insofar as it is a real sort of thing, I think comes down to median wages. And the most interesting work, I think, that I've seen, and that has really come from the Resolution Foundation, but they sort of said, look, here is this grotesque sort of term, the sort of Hollywood term of the decoupling of productivity and median wages. When the Treasury replies to that idea, it tends to point out mean wages. And that's not a very good idea, because of course, as you get more income, at the very, very top of the scale, it tends that the mean doesn't accurately reflect what is really going on. So I would stick more with what the Resolution Foundation has to say about it. You look at median wages and you see that there has been a decoupling of productivity and wages. And that no matter where you are on the political scale, that is a morally unacceptable position to be in, but it's also a practically unacceptable position to be in. And the political party that shows that it recognises the problem in concrete, plain terms people can understand will start to benefit from that. I do not think, I have to tell you, that Labour is even capable of talking in concrete, plain terms about any subject, including this subject. And I do not think that the Tories, who are slightly better at talking in those terms, have any of the moral or the political sense to recognise what the problem is, even if they were to understand what to do about it.
So I think you said that it's caused by a breakdown in the relationship in productivity and median wages. Christy, you wrote about this.
I did, yes. No, it's got nothing to do with that. It's a supply side crisis. It was there long before median wages stagnated, well before the current recession, actually. I've done a back of the envelope calculation in the book showing that if you get rid of the worst supply side distortions in the economy, you could save a family of 4 something like £750 a month. Now that depends on the type of household that you're looking at and what part of the country they live in and so forth, but there are a number of very severe distortions that push on household bills. The biggest part of that is the land use planning system, the way it rations land and drives the housing costs. So more than a third of housing costs in the UK are explained by that. That's the pure cost of the planning system, and that then pushes up prices in the retail sector.
The whole 15-minute segment.
Okay. But on top of that, if I can just add, there's the cost of green taxes, the green agenda, and the over-regulation of childcare, sin taxes, and so forth. If you add that up, that makes cost of living crisis in itself.
Fantastic. Yeah, putting aside all the details of policy economics, if you boil it down to the essentials, surely it's really very simple. Aren't we basically entitled, all of us, to a comfortable standard of living?
Well, if we really want to boil it down, then no, we're not. We're entitled to what we produce. We're entitled to what we create. We're entitled to what we earn. We certainly are not entitled to somebody else's stuff, to what somebody else earns, what somebody else creates. I mean, the cost of living crisis, like most crises, or I'd say all crises of the mixed economy, are products of government policy, are products of the entitlement mentality. They're products of the specific tax policies that engaged. I mean, everything that you just heard about, land use policies, housing. We could have a whole session on how regulatory policies drive up the cost of everything we buy dramatically. Monetary policy, central bank policy. In some sense, I agree that we're experiencing today a reverse Robin Hood, because that's what monetary policy is driving, and certainly in the United States. I know a little bit less about the UK. In the United States, monetary policy is fueling a huge rally in stock market while raising costs for everyday people. And so if you have stocks, you're doing quite well. Who has stocks? Generally wealthy people have stocks. Everybody else is paying for it to higher prices elsewhere. So there's so much redistribution of wealth going on in our economy because of government policy. It's hard to keep track of the net effects that are going on. Monetary policy is reversed, but then with taxes it goes in the other direction. So we have massive distortions in our economy. So to the point where we can't tell what is and isn't. But from a moral perspective, which is, I think, what you're trying to corner me into. No, what we need is the freedom to produce. What we need is the freedom to create. And then what we need is a free market in which we can purchase in real terms, real values of what we've produced and what we've created. You know, you're not entitled to put out a gun and take money from somebody else. The democratic process does not change that fact. You're still pulling out a gun and taking somebody else's money. You're just now getting a lot of people to vote that it's okay. But voting doesn't make theft good. Voting just hides the fact. Not really, it doesn't really hide it, but it pretends to hide the fact that what is engaged here is highway robbery. Now, to get to where we need to be, to get to a point where one can stop the robbery and stop the redistribution and stop the entitlements, is not a simple process. But starting to work towards that would be a step in the right direction.
So I want to turn to our